Before Waco, there was Ruby Ridge. On August 21st, 1992, an 11-day siege would begin in Boundary County, Idaho. That siege, now known as Ruby Ridge, was what many believed to be the threshold allowing Waco to even happen. What exactly happened between the Weaver family and the agents that summer would lead to bloodshed, triggering a domino effect of mistrust to those meant to protect us, a feeling felt to this day, 31 years later. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm your host of Art and Crime, Tina Williams, where I share with you my candid perspective, research, and thoughts about a true crime case while painting an original art piece related to the case. If you're wanting to learn how to paint as well, then please visit my other channel, link below, Tina Williams Art. Today we will be discussing the Ruby Ridge case, and trigger warnings are as follow: death of a minor, death of a pet dog, government conspiracy, hostage siege situation, violence, and white supremacy. It's quite a lot. You may have heard about the case. There might be parts you haven't heard about it or where you just wanted to learn more about it. So we're going to jump right in and talk about the case. On August 21st, 1992 was the beginning of the 11-day siege, and trying to understand what led up to that siege is a tangled web of the greatest game of he said, she said. I wanted to start from the beginning on my research. I wanted to have a better understanding of who Randy Weaver was, who his wife was, who his children were. Was what happened on that mountain a perfect storm of many small events leading to complete disaster, or was it the inevitable regardless of the choices made along the way? In the end, I think I have a decent grasp on what happened, as much as anyone can as a Monday night quarterback this case. But the process to get there was frustrating. Even getting through the first bits of understanding who Randy was came with discourse. Every bit of the way was a struggle of just trying to verify information. Was he an actual Green Beret? Did he really introduce himself to his future wife as Pete because he hated his real name, Randall? These two questions I still can't answer with confidence, but the rest I feel I have a decent enough grasp on to share with you what I believe really happened on that ridge. Side note, with lack of confidence, I share that Weaver most likely was not an actual Green Beret, but did some training in and around the Special Forces. So while he may not have the title of Green Beret, he certainly had an extensive enough training within the military. And of course, some light, I guess you could put it light, as Special Forces training. I personally don't have any military experience. So I defer to anyone in the military who wants to correct me. I come from a military family. My father, my husband, I thank you all for your services. So absolutely mean no disrespect if I'm not using the correct terminology or if I got this information incorrect. I did try to locate Randy Weaver's DD-214 to find out exactly what was going on, but didn't come up with anything. But I do welcome any kind of information anybody wants to provide in regards to that, because I am curious. So let's start from the beginning. Randall Claude Weaver was born on January 3rd, 1948, and married the love of his life, Vicky, in 1971 after meeting her while on leave in 1970. They went on to have 4 beautiful children: Sarah, Samuel, Rachel, and Elishaba. After reading the late Great Planet Earth book, Vicky became paranoid about a pending apocalypse. The book, The Late Great Planet Earth, was a major bestseller in the 70s, and it discussed signs of end times and Bible prophecies coming to fruition. and just really talked about, things that you would start to see mostly in the 80s. So the book came out in the 70s, and I was talking about signs that you would see mostly in the 80s about end times. Sound familiar? I don't know about you, but I've been hearing about these end times and all these signs since I was a child. I mean, in 2020, it certainly felt like it might be the end times, but that's the closest I've ever seen it coming. And if this is your belief, hey, more power to you. It's not mine. I just feel like there's always been kind of this doomsday feeling from a lot of people that just thankfully doesn't happen. It's like growing up in California. I grew up in California, and everything I ever heard about, anytime there was a little tiny earthquake, we would hear the big one's coming. And then I'm kind of derailing here, but and I went through the Northridge earthquake. We lost our house. It was a huge event. I still have a little bit of PTSD from it. And I remember when that happened, I'm like, this is it. That was it. That was the big one. And they're like, nope, that's not it. So I think this is just kind of par for the course, this whole doomsday thing. But Randy and Vicky did what a lot of us dream about doing, especially the last few years. I know I certainly do, and that's buy a large piece of land and escape reality. I mean, society. Granted, their reasons were biblical, but it's not hard to imagine doing this. And then you take into it the book, the one that they read that kind of further fueled their fears. And it's just going to continue to feed into it. As a mother, I have 2 kids. I would do anything to protect my children. And Vicky was doing exactly that. And while her fears about a biblical doom didn't happen, thankfully, there was nothing that would have convinced them otherwise that it wasn't going to happen. They found their dream escape on 20 remote acres in the beautiful mountains in Boundary County, Idaho. I've been to this area briefly. It's gorgeous. I don't blame them for wanting to escape. I'm probably feeling a little envious right now, considering I'm living in the middle of hell. It has been over 110 degrees here in Phoenix for the last 5-ish weeks. So going off into the woods in Idaho sounds very appealing right now. After they purchased the acreage, they paid for it in cash. Actually, they traded for it, but essentially they bought it outright. They built a cabin and began their self-sustained homestead life. They were living the Pinterest life before Pinterest was even a thing. Vicky was homeschooling her children. Randy taught them to hunt and live off the land. This was their dream come true. This is what they wanted. And they felt like being on top of the mountain like that also would help protect them from the pending apocalypse. They were living above what they thought would be the apocalypse. I don't know exactly what form that was coming in. I know that they were very, very well armed. But being on top of a mountain, you would think maybe floods or something. So, and I'm not going to read the book, but if you've read that book and you want to tell me exactly what kind of apocalypse that was, that'd be cool. But they found the perfect spot. They were loving it. They were happy. But their seclusion didn't do anything to quell their paranoia about the future. It just further fed it. And they became more and more paranoid. They became more and more driven into their beliefs. And with as remote as they were, and they were very remote, it's no surprise they became friends with the very few neighbors that they had. And remember, they had 20 acres, so the neighbors they have are out there. And you wouldn't be surprised. Okay, well, there's me and a handful of neighbors within several miles, and you're going to become friends with them until you realize who their neighbors actually were. And in reflection, I'm not sure that their chosen destination in Idaho and their neighbors weren't a happy accident. The Aryan Nations, a white supremacist neo-Nazi group, was very, very prominent in the area. And their home base was just 2 counties over in Kootenai County. And so they always had rallies in the area. They always had meetings in the area. This area was known for this. And I imagine, if you're from the area, maybe you can help expound on it a little bit more. I imagine it was known to the Weavers when they purchased their land who their neighbors were going to be. And the Weavers attended the Aryan Nations meetings. They later claimed they did so because they were just being Christian neighbors, and the Aryan Nations believed in the Bible and they would talk Christianity. And Randy said he is open to discussion with anybody and he would debate with them. And a lot of it was the similarities of Christianity. And so he states, or the Weavers state, that they weren't white supremacists. Weaver claimed that he wasn't a white supremacist, but a separatist. Who knows? Maybe they were just bored up there on the ridge without Netflix and YouTube. Though, from where I stand, the difference between a supremacist and a separatist is about as different as the taste of Mr. Pibb and Dr. Pepper. I understand why individuals argue about whether Weaver was racist. I get it. It's hard to defend his actions during the standoff and what happened to his family, to be on his side, to root for the underdog. That's what we want to do. As much as we all want to be on their side, to support them, yet still keep your moral compass in check, because how do you support somebody who is so fundamentally against what you believe in? Especially when Weaver argued about it himself. He says he wasn't like them. He wasn't a member of Aryan Nations. He wasn't, and that's been verified. Yet he attended the meetings. He states he wasn't racist. He just wanted races to be separate from one another. I'm not sure I quite get the difference, and I'm not sure that I really care what the difference is, because it's minute in my opinion. He may not have been as committed as his neighbors or actual members of Aryan Nations, but he certainly had no issues keeping company with them. And as his saying goes, you are who you surround yourself with. And I get it. That's a really broad generalization. I mean, we don't want to say, oh yeah, just because your friends are like this doesn't mean you are. And to an extent, we're all individuals. But I don't know about you. I personally, if somebody is very much a part of something I'm against, whether it's racism or homophobia, it's just something I can't overlook. And if you can, I think that says something about you. Even if you think all you're surrounding yourself with are good Christian folk and all he cared about was keeping his children safe from the impending apocalypse. Maybe it was, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And if you realize that your neighbors are Aryan Nations, maybe you felt it was safer to be friends with them. But I didn't get that impression from his interviews that happened afterwards, or a lot of their own beliefs, or what their own friends and family said. It seemed like he was towing that line for sure. I don't think Weaver was as innocent in his racism as he claims. And a racist without violence is still a racist. And he towed that line, like I said. And he agreed to sell sawed-off shotguns to Aryan Nations member Gus Malgasano. What exactly did you think Gus was going to do with those shotguns, Randy? Target practice with Coke cans? Deer hunts? You don't need sawed-off shotguns for that. And Randy knew that. Randy was not a dumb person. He was very smart. When you hear interviews with him, he's witty, he's clever, and you definitely need a level of intelligence to be witty and clever, in my opinion. He was self-sustained on the land. A lot of that he taught himself. They built their own cabin. He was a well-respected military man. By all accounts, they were very smart people. They were very well-read. So I can't believe for a second that he thought selling sawed-off shotguns to an Aryan Nations member wasn't going to be used for nefarious reasons. Unfortunately for Randy, Gus Magasano, the Aryan Nations member that he sold those sawed-off shotguns to, and I've seen reports say it was 2. I've seen some say it's 5. I've seen one say he said he could get 5 or 6, but sold 2. Whatever it was, he sold sawed-off shotguns to an Aryan Nations, or what he believed was an Aryan Nations member. But Gus Magasano was actually an undercover ATF agent. That ATF agent, Kenneth Fadley, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, was undercover. They were investigating Aryan Nations, and obviously they caught Randy selling off sawed-up shotguns. That's a federal offense. And after that, the ATF tried to recruit Randy to be an informant for them, and he refused. And that doesn't really surprise me. I mean, based off of his reasons, yeah, they wanted to go to the top of the mountain because the apocalypse was coming, but they were also very, very anti-government. And they wanted that seclusion. They didn't want anything to do with the government. And so if the government's going to say, hey, why don't you be an informant and rat out your buddies? No shocker that he turned them down. And when he turned them down, I have a feeling that the ATF, their ego was either a bit bruised or they just used that as an excuse to completely go after them. So when he said no, Weaver received a weapons charge, and Vicky, who was very outspoken, wrote to U.S. Attorney Maurice O. Ellsworth and addressing him as servant of the Queen of Babylon. And then she wrote, quote, "The stink of your lawless government has reached heaven, the abode of Yahweh our Yahshua, and whether we live or whether we die, we will not bow to your evil commandments," unquote. Randy was arrested and released with a trial set for February 19th, 1991. The trial was then moved to February 20th, but a probation officer sent a letter to Weaver incorrectly stating that the new trial date was March 20th, not February 20th. When Weaver failed to appear for trial, because remember, they told him his trial was in March, not February. So shocker that he failed to appear in court. They issued a bench warrant for his arrest. Weaver was subsequently indicted by a federal grand jury for failing to appear at trial, and the U.S. Marshal Service was tasked with arresting him. Marshals assessed that Weaver and his family were likely to resist violently if confronted directly, so plans for a stealth operation were drawn up. While I don't necessarily disagree with that assessment, it seems there should be a bit more to that sort of decision than a hunch. But hey, who needs that sort of in-depth knowledge when you're the ATF? I mean, you sent them the wrong court date, and he doesn't show up, and you turn around and you say, well, we don't think he was going to show up anyway, so we're just going to go after him. I don't know about you, but if that was you or me trying to come up with that wouldn't fly. But hey, you know what? They can get away with it. Unfortunately, the stealth operation was not so stealthy. On August 21st, 1992, the family dog Striker, which I think is a fabulous name for a dog, discovered 6 ATF agents lurking in the woods. They were dressed in camouflage. They didn't have anything indicating who they were. They were pretty much covered from head to toe in camouflage except for their eyes. They were hiding in the bushes. They were definitely trying to be as discreet as possible, but obviously Stryker outsmarted them. And he did exactly what a good dog should do. He alerted his family. My dogs would either roll over for belly rubs or take off running scared for their life. Those are my dogs. But Stryker was a good dog and did exactly what he was supposed to do. And this point is where the story split. This is where it really becomes a he said, she said. And so I'm going to try to share with you the story that is most corroborated by evidence, forensic evidence, but also give you the other side a little bit as well. And the story that seems to match up with evidence the most is the Weaver side of things. And so when Stryker, the dog, sniffed out the hiding agents, he started barking, alerting his family to where there was a disturbance, and Agent Art Roderick panicked. He said he thought Stryker was going to attack him. Maybe he was. That was his job. Then he panicked and he shot and he killed Stryker. I don't know about you, but this instantly makes me hate him. I don't care who you are. Just when it comes to dogs and kids, I just have zero tolerance. And you're on somebody else's property. But anyways, we'll get to that. Samuel was right behind his dog. Stryker was his dog. Samuel is the second child of the Weavers. He's the oldest boy. He was 14 years old at the time. I have a 14-year-old boy, so this really hits home for me. He was just behind Stryker, and they were with a family friend named Kevin Harris. They were out, from what I understand, they were out either hunting or, they heard the dogs barking earlier or something, but they were just out and about. They had no idea that there was anybody on their property. They were just out hunting and doing what they do. But when this happened, obviously took him by surprise. Samuel, 14, justifiably pissed off, yelled at Art Roderick, and he said, "You shot my dog, you son of a bitch," and shot toward the area the agents were hiding. They were hiding in the bush. They were camouflaged, so he was shooting towards the area, and he didn't really know what he was shooting at. He just knew somebody shot his dog. Once he did this prompted return fire, and the agents started shooting back. So let me repeat this part. Federal agents who were not in uniform, they were in camouflage, literally from head to toe, shot a dog while on someone else's private property, and a 14-year-old child shot toward where the gunfire originated from, and these trained federal agents shot back toward a child. Sam Weaver, 14 years old, was shot in the back. He was shot in his back. He was killed instantly. What does this mean? You don't get shot in your back if you are running towards or facing the agents. He was retreating. He was running away. And they shot a 14-year-old child in the back. So at this moment, federal agents have killed a dog and a child. while the dog and child were on their own damn property. And then Kevin Harris, remember the family friend, shoots back. I would do the same thing. At this point, they have no idea who's on their own property shooting and killing them. Remember, they all firmly believe there's an apocalypse coming. According to the federal agents, though, they said they announced themselves. I'm not sure if they did this before they shot the dog or after. Logic dictates to me that they did no such thing, because if they did it before they shot Stryker, that means they would have announced themselves before Stryker realized they were there, which would have completely defeated their purpose and wouldn't have panicked Art Roderick. And if they did it after, then that means they managed to announce who they were just before panicking and shooting a dog, then a child in the back. So according to their logic, they announced who they were. None of that makes sense. Harris makes it back to the house. He tells the Weavers what happened, and Vicky starts wailing. They said that her cries could be heard echoing through the mountain. And I can 100% feel that and believe that. Her kid just went out on a normal hike with their dog and family friend. Never in a million years did she think this was going to happen. So she's like screaming and she's crying. And if you're on top of the mountain, you could probably hear that, unless you were the ATF agents who had them on surveillance. They didn't hear them, because apparently they had no idea what happened and that they had just killed little Samuel. I'm not sure what kind of surveillance the ATF agents, these federal agents, have, that you have no idea that you just killed a kid. But hey, the Weavers managed to retrieve their son's body and bring it back to the birthing shed. Now, the birthing shed. This is a thing that should have been left in the 19th century. It's just so backwards. I'm pretty sure it being used today or in this time period, modern times, it's more of a religious thing. I think back in the day it was probably more of a just misunderstanding of how things work. But basically, from what I understand, a birthing shed is you, when you're on your period, when a woman's on her period, she would sleep in the birthing shed because she was dirty. That's what I've read. And then I've heard others say that's literally where women would give birth, because it's such a dirty process. I've given birth twice. It's definitely messy. But yeah, so Google it. It's interesting. There's a couple of different perspectives on it, but considering how religious they were, it's not that surprising that they had a birthing shed. But this is where they put their son, I guess, as a temporary holding spot until they figured out what they were going to do, what just happened. So this was August 21st. August 22nd, the FBI was dispatched to the area. They were told basically that their own agents were being held under gunfire. I mean, the ATF called the FBI. They basically painted this picture of, we're under attack. These people are well armed. One of our guys are dead. So the FBI went in thinking that this was this complete attack on them. So we need to talk about the FBI's rules of engagement. FBI standard rules of engagement are, it's very brief. It says, agents are not to use deadly force against any person except as necessary in self-defense or the defense of another when they have reason to believe they or another are in danger of death or grievous bodily harm. Whenever feasible, verbal warning should be given before deadly force is applied. The FBI had a revised rules of engagement assumed in force at Ruby Ridge. They revised their rules of engagement specifically for the Weaver family. 1. If any adult male is observed with a weapon prior to the announcement, deadly force can and should be employed if the shot can be taken without endangering any children. 2. If any adult in the compound is observed with a weapon after the surrender announcement is made and is not attempting to surrender, deadly force can and should be employed to neutralize the individual. 3. If compromised by any animal, particularly the dogs, you like how they threw that in there after the fact? That animal should be eliminated. 4. Any subjects other than Randall Weaver, Vicky Weaver, Kevin Harris presenting threats of death or grievous bodily harm, the FBI rules of deadly force are in effect. Deadly force can be utilized to prevent the death or grievous bodily injury to oneself or that of another. Now, who else is up there besides Randy, Vicky, and Kevin? The only other human beings up there are children. They literally have added to their rules of engagement that they can kill the children. So, notes on this revision process and its legality. FBI officials in Washington first discussed revising the standard rules of engagement on August 21st, hours after the killing of Marshall William Deegan. So Marshall William Deegan is a person that Kevin Harris had shot after Samuel was shot. Larry Potts, head of the FBI's criminal division, and his deputy, Danny Coulson, believed that Deegan had been shot in an unprovoked attack and that other agents were still pinned down by fire from the Weaver cabin. Obviously, either a misunderstanding or a flat-out lie. Potts and Coulter thought that the extremely dangerous situation at Ruby Ridge called for a change in the rules to allow snipers to shoot at the Weavers without provocation. The FBI's legal advisor asked about the legality of proposed revision, said that it would depend upon a showing that the revision was necessary to bring the situation under control and protect innocent people from serious injuries. He also stated that any final decision to revise the rule would have to depend upon an appraisal of the situation by FBI officials in Idaho. Moreover, he said no shooting could occur until after a demand had been made for Weaver's surrender. On board an FBI jet to Idaho on the night of August 21st, Richard Rogers, head of the FBI's hostage rescue team, drafted revised rules that allowed the shooting of any adult seen with weapon. Such an individual could be the subject of deadly force, called on the phone in Washington. Potts gave preliminary approval to the revision, but said that they would have to be submitted in writing before final approval. On August 22nd, in the Bonners Ferry Armory, Richard Rogers briefed hostage rescue team members about the operation. He told the HRT that if the adults in the Weaver cabin failed to respond to a surrender command and are seen carrying a weapon, deadly force can be used to neutralize them. In preparing to send snipers into the hills around the Weaver cabin, Richard Rogers made a final change in the proposed revised rules of engagement. Deadly force can be employed was changed to deadly force can and should be employed. The operational plan, including the revised rules of engagement, was faxed to Washington on the afternoon of August 22nd for final approval. Danny Coulson in Washington objected to the operations plan with respect to its discussion of negotiations. Revisions of that aspect of the plan were made, and then Coulson approved the overall plan. Later, no one at the FBI headquarters would admit actually reviewing the final revised rules of engagement, even though it was part of the operational plan that had been faxed. There would be more bloodshed. Randy, Sarah, and Kevin were getting ready to pray over the body of Sammy in the birthing shed before they had decided to bury him. So they were getting ready. They were leaving the house to go to the birthing shed to pray over little Sammy. As the three made their way to the shed, armed as usual, and it's not just because there were snipers in the area, this is just their way of life. The snipers were ready to act using the new revised rules of engagement. As the three reached the shed, Randy was shot near his armpit by sniper Lon Horiuchi. I don't know. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sarah, the oldest daughter, tried to shield Randy from another shot and pushed him in front of her toward the house. The three ran toward the house where Vicky, with 10-month-old Elishaba in her arms, held the door open. She's holding a 10-month-old baby as there's gunfire, and she's trying to hold the door open for her other child, her husband, and their family friend to get through the door. Randy and Sarah ducked inside, but as Kevin was going into the house, Horiuchi fired again. He claims he was aiming for Kevin. However, the bullet tore through Vicky's face before hitting Kevin in the chest. Vicky was holding her baby in her arms. She was not armed. She was just holding a baby. By the time Randy and Sarah dragged Vicky into the house, she was already dead. She was still clutching the crying baby in her arms. They laid her in the kitchen where she would remain for several days. Kevin was seriously injured by the same bullet that killed Vicky, and he begged Randy to kill him and end his pain. At this point, we have one dead federal agent who it's been argued since was killed by friendly fire and not by Kevin Harris, but I can't find any information that I feel actually verifies that, and most stories do point to Kevin Harris being the one that shot and killed him, so that's what I'm going to go with. We have a dead pet dog, we have one dead child, and we have one dead mother who was holding her 10-month-old baby at the time. The baby, fortunately, was fine, aside from screaming and crying and wanting its mother. And it's just, I can't even imagine. And it gets worse. Federal agents, once again, claimed they had no idea that Vicky was dead either, which supposedly explains their callous behavior over the next few days. They would taunt the Weavers over the loudspeakers, saying things like they had pancakes for breakfast, and "What about you, Mrs. Weaver?" They said they supposedly were just trying to convince them to come out and end the situation. But imagine being their children and you're seeing your dead mother on the floor and you're hearing this over the speakers. I can't even explain my anger at this point. I'm just envisioning this whole scenario play out. You have a screaming and crying baby. You have two sisters and a father incredibly distraught and confused. The two girls have their injured father and family friend who's on the brink of death in the room with their own beloved mother who spent day in and day out with them, now lying on the kitchen floor, and their brother in the birthing shed dead.
Good job.
I mean, their world was just destroyed within less than a day. They don't have any connection with the world, so they have no idea what's being reported or said. They don't even really know what's going on at this point. They don't understand why they're under fire like this. Any communication the agents try to make with them is being ignored because, shocker, the Weavers don't trust them. I mean, they were sending over robots with telephones hoping that they would pick up the phone, but they didn't want to go near these robots because they didn't know whether it was rigged. Who can blame them? And all this time, the government agents are taunting them over loudspeakers. While this is all happening, a crowd is forming at the base of the mountain, and this crowd is made up of angry neighbors. They're mad that this is happening and such lengths are being taken by the government on someone's private property. It's made national news, and as the crowd grows, so does their anger. And then they find out Vicky was shot and killed.
This communication is going to continue.
There's a video clip of this, and I'm going.
I got a reason for it. Now, there's some bad news. The bad news is, first of all, that Kevin was hit by a bullet on Saturday. It has incapacitated him, but he's well. I didn't talk to him, but I was told by the girls, by Rachel, by Sarah, I was told by Randy that he's all right, that Yahweh is taking care of him, that he is alive and he's healthy. Bullet apparently went through his arm, into his chest, into his lung, broke a rib, but he's all right. Again, the communication was tough. Tomorrow I'm going to throw a bullhorn right through the window so that they can pick it up and we can talk, because they want him to reach out and get a telephone. It's about 3 feet from the door. That ain't never going to happen. That's right. The bad news, and get a grip on yourself, is that Vicky was killed. And that's most unfortunate thing. Apparently, she was killed on Saturday. Now, Rachel and Sarah, I want you to listen to what I got to say so you get it right. Rachel and Sarah seem to be in high spirits. I didn't see them because they're in the interior of the house, pretty well bunkered in. But they hollered out and said, "Bo, we're okay." And I talked to both of them. I had a good dialogue with Randy. The only thing that is shameful about this...
To try to insert it in here. Hopefully I can find it. If not, then I suggest looking it up. But the anger is palpable and swelling dangerously, and it seems as though nothing will calm them. Both sides are frustrated, upset, feeling betrayed, and wanting their own vengeance. The Weavers don't even realize that at this time there was a growing crowd in their favor just down the hill from them. All they're aware of is being under siege, and their family has been attacked by their own government. In so many ways you may think, and I can agree to an extent, that this was inevitable. They were committing crimes and refusing to cooperate with authorities, go to court, follow procedures in place. The part that was inevitable was that the feds would eventually be knocking on their door. Or would they? There are over 6,000 weapon charges prosecuted every single year. Since 1999, this number has ebbed and flowed, but has stayed above the 6,000 mark. These are prosecutions, not just charges and warrants issued. At this point, what happened to Randy Weaver was not a prosecution. It was just a charge filed, and there was a bench warrant out. The ATF remains the leading investigative agency in these weapons charges and prosecutions. They're involved in over 60% of them. And while it may be the strawman argument and subjective to say there are so many crimes that warrant more attention, in my opinion, it still needs to be said. So what exactly does the ATF do? Its responsibilities include the investigation and prevention of federal offenses involving the unlawful use, manufacture, and possession of firearms and explosive, acts of arson and bombings, and illegal trafficking and tax evasion or alcohol and tobacco products. The ATF also regulates via licensing the sale, possession, and transportation of firearms, ammunition, and explosives in interstate commerce. Many of the ATF's activities are carried out in conjunction with task force made up of state and local law enforcement officers, such as Project Safe Neighborhoods. So yes, they were doing their job by going after Randy Weaver. But while Aryan Nations would be deemed a terrorist organization not too long after these investigations, I'm not sure exactly how much of any of this really had to do with asking Randy to sell sawed-off shotguns versus a bruised ego. The mistakes on the federal side is numerous. Beginning with notification of a change in court date. The argument was Randy would have ignored the court date anyway, and while you and I can probably agree with that, unless you have a crystal ball, you can't use that as an argument for what they did. Bogue writes, A political action figure running for president and a former Green Beret made his knight in shining armor arrival and convinced Randy Weaver over the course of 3 days to finally surrender, ending the siege on the 11th day. Greitz shared many of the views with Weaver and was a hero to many of those that supported Weaver's anti-government stance. Greitz convinced Weaver he would get him an attorney, and seeing his friend dying and wife dead on the floor probably also helped with that decision making. Weaver and Harris were charged with a host of crimes, including murder, conspiracy, and assault. An Idaho jury acquitted Harris of all charges, and Weaver was convicted of failing to appear for the original firearms charge, which I still don't think he should have been convicted of that. An inquiry by the Justice Department criticized the FBI for failing to gather sufficient intelligence, for not ordering the residents of the cabin to surrender. They never did that before engaging them in a firefight. It also concluded that Horiachi's second shot was unconstitutional because Harris and Weaver were running for cover and could not be considered imminent threats. The inquiry further alleged that Horiachi unnecessarily endangered others by firing at the door of the cabin. You think? Nevertheless, the U.S. Attorney General thought that the criminal charges against Horiachi were unwarranted. Prosecutors in Boundary County, Idaho, however, charged him with involuntary manslaughter. The case was removed to a federal court district, which dismissed charges against Horiachi on the grounds that he was immune from prosecution because he was acting in his official capacity. I call BS on that. An appeals court affirmed the district court's ruling, but a second en banc, which means fuller complement of judges, panel reversed that decision and required that Horiachi stand trial, but before a third, larger panel could be convened to consider that decision, the state of Idaho announced that it was dropping charges, and all three earlier rulings were vacated. This would be a very good time for me to become a conspiracy theorist. Randy sued the federal government for what happened on Ruby Ridge, and they settled the lawsuit in 1995. And a statement from the Department of Justice made a statement that they issued, and I will read that. It's brief. The Department of Justice announced today that it has resolved all claims by the Randy Weaver family against the United States and its employees. Excuse me. Under the settlement, each of the three children of Vicki Weaver will receive $1 million, and her husband Randy will receive $100,000 to resolve $200 million in claims filed by the family after the deaths of Mrs. Weaver and her 14-year-old son Samuel at Ruby Ridge, Idaho in August 1992. This settlement reflects the loss of the Weaver children to their mother and brother. By entering into a settlement, the United States hopes to take a substantial step toward healing the wounds the incident inflicted. Samuel Weaver was killed on August 21, 1992 in a firefight with U.S. Marshals that left Samuel and Deputy U.S. Marshal William Deegan dead. Marshals were surveilling the property in preparation for serving an arrest warrant on Randy Weaver. Mrs. Weaver was accidentally killed the next day when a bullet fired by an FBI agent struck her as she stood out of sight behind a cabin door. The United States does not admit wrongdoing or legal liability to the plaintiffs. At the instance of the government, the settlement agreement explicitly provides that nothing in its language is intended to interfere with or reduce the availability of information or evidence in connection with the incident. Randy Weaver died of natural causes on May 11, 2022 at the age of 74. Almost 30 years since the incident at Ruby Ridge. It was just a few months shy. Since the siege, he remarried and became an atheist. He conducted limited interviews since and has expressed regrets over not appearing in court for the weapons charges. I can only imagine how he felt. While his wife was adamantly in support of, and perhaps a big part of why they didn't show, he probably felt responsibility for her and their son's death that fateful day, especially considering their beliefs and him being the protector of the family. I have mixed feelings about this case. I'm not a fan of the government. I think they do more harm than good and believe they're power happy. I don't care if you disagree with me, or allowed to. We're allowed to have different opinions. They crossed the line in Ruby Ridge. It wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last time. In my opinion, they got away with, and many believe that it's because of that the incident in Waco happened shortly after. In both Waco and Ruby Ridge, there were innocent deaths of children that could have been prevented. In both cases, the government was going after the bad guy without holding back, and a price was dearly paid. They weren't held properly accountable, and no better saying fits than do two wrongs make a right. I hope that you got something from this telling of Ruby Ridge. And if you have any cases you would like me to cover, please let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to my channel.